and welcome to Talking Points. I'm Dave Kelly, Director of Advanced Media Production at Cal State Long Beach. Our topic today is forensic science in the real world. How accurate are those television programs that portray crime scene investigations? My guest today is Ruben Flores. Mr. Flores is a retired criminalist, and he is also a current educator and teacher. Welcome, Ruben, and thank you for joining us on Talking Points.
My pleasure to be here.
We'll go through your career here for just a moment as we start. I know that you spent 33 years as a criminalist. Over the 33 years, you worked for 3 different agencies. First, the LAPD Crime Lab here in Los Angeles.
Yes.
Also, the Huntington Beach Police Department.
Yes.
And then you finished up your career at the LA County Sheriff's Department Crime Lab.
I did.
And over the course of time, you must have come to some conclusions about your work. We're going to get into that in just a moment. But first, for the benefit of our audience, we should probably define the term criminalist, what that means. A lot of people are familiar with the term criminologist and get the two confused. So if you would, give us a brief description of each and how are they different?
Generally speaking, a criminalist is a person with a scientific background that applies the theories and methods of science to matters of the law. I can't really speak to what a criminologist fully does, but it's my understanding a criminologist deals more with the social science aspects of crime, whereas the criminalist deals with physical evidence and science.
So as a criminalist, you're dealing with the scientific aftermath of crime, whereas a criminologist is trying to determine how or why and what motivates the crime in the first place?
I would say that's pretty generally correct, yes.
Okay, and as far as the training and education that one needs to obtain before they can become a criminalist, what kinds of educational training, background, and so on does a person need to have?
Well, I think the general standard for a person to become a criminalist is a 4-year degree, a minimum of a 4-year degree in one of the natural sciences. We have criminalists that range in education-wise all the way to PhD, but the starting point is a 4-year degree in a natural science, and that actually will get you into the door of a crime laboratory. It will get you a position.
In your particular case, I know that according to your resume, you went to East Los Angeles College. You had an AA degree in chemistry, then
Yes.
you moved on, transferred to UCLA, got the bachelor's degree, 4-year degree in chemistry, and then
Yes.
later on in your career, you went back for a master's degree at Cal State LA in criminalistics.
Yes, about middle of my forensic career, I decided to pursue a more advanced degree, and so I went to Cal State LA. They have a master's degree in criminalistics there, and I achieved that goal.
I guess the more important question actually is, why did you want to become a criminalist? What was it about that particular field that was attractive to you?
Well, that was pretty interesting. At the time I was a junior at UCLA, I had never even heard of this particular field. And somebody came in and gave a presentation about criminalistics. As a matter of fact, it was a director of the program at Cal State LA at the time. And I remember sitting in the room listening to this description and realizing, to me it sounded, this is just like Sherlock Holmes, which was a boyhood idol of mine. And I just thought it was fascinating. Well, I went ahead and finished my degree in chemistry. There were no openings in criminalistics, but I did look into it. And I became a chemist for a while, but I always had that feeling that I wanted to look into criminalistics. So probably about 4 years after my graduation, I looked into it again, and lo and behold, I found a spot at the LAPD in 1980, and the rest is kind of history. That's where I stayed.
What were your expectations or impressions going into the field, and now 25, 30 years later, 33 years later after you retired from the field, what were your conclusions about it then?
I was very excited to enter that field. I was asked almost upon entry, why I wanted this particular type of job. And my answer at that time was I wanted to do things and see things that other people don't. And I can tell you after 33, 34 years that that's exactly what happened. I was thoroughly satisfied. It met all my expectations and more. And I was very happy to be a part of it.
There's obviously a heavy science component, I guess that goes without saying with this particular field, because you're doing scientific analysis. First you're gathering evidence and then you're analyzing the evidence after it's been gathered. But that being the case, and science being the most important aspect of this, what are the characteristics that a person needs to have in order to be a quote-unquote good criminalist?
Looking back on it now, and this would be just my opinion, but looking back on it now, I would say communication skills are critical. A person who's a criminalist needs to be able to take those scientific topics and subjects and communicate those theories and ideas and results of any testing into terms that a layperson such as a juror or other members of the court could understand. So communication is critical. And then two others that come to mind immediately are patience and attention to detail.
You're a scientist, first and foremost.
Yes.
And that requires that attention to detail.
Yes, it does.
Okay, and so when you talk to young people in this high school course that you teach, what do you emphasize the most to them, or what do you emphasize to them is the most important thing about preparing for this career? And are they aware of the scientific rigors that are involved in it?
I do make them aware every chance I get that if a student feels they want to pursue this career, they must have that four-year degree in a natural science. So at the high school level, when I speak to those students, I tell them, now is the time that you have to start thinking about this. You pick your majors if you think you want to do this. Now is the time to pursue that. And then I also tell them at any level, but especially at the high school level, don't forget your math. Focus on that. Don't forget your English and reading comprehension. Those are critical. Those are all part of communication skills. And if you don't get that early, it might just be too late.
And how do students react to this when you tell them that?
They listen. I'm teaching high school students right now, and how much they absorb, I can't tell you. I haven't been teaching high school students long enough, but I do see that they are listening. Those that already have the interest ask me a lot of questions, and I can see that their minds are working towards formulating a goal, and I'm happy to see that. So maybe years from now, I'll see how many of those have been successful.
Okay, well let's talk about CSI. Since I mentioned it in the introduction, crime scene investigation. There are a number of programs on television that deal with CSI applications. When you see those television programs, do they have a ring of truth to them? Are they at least in the right ballpark, or is Hollywood Hollywood and it will always go for the most dramatic kind of scene, whether it comports with reality or not?
I think for the most part, they're in the ballpark. Especially with the most recent programs. They've had the foresight to bring people on board in their production crews that have knowledge of this field, and they do actually, I believe most of those programs do try to portray what we do as a criminalist, a crime laboratory worker, forensic scientist, in an accurate fashion, within the realm of the reality that they are there for entertainment.
And you have some friends, some colleagues, some former co-workers that work as technical consultants in Hollywood, consulting with the various production companies that are making these shows. What do your friends and colleagues tell you? Do the producers listen to them? Are they actually being listened to when those scripts are being written?
Yes, they are. They are being listened to. If they have an objection to something that's being presented, that doesn't mean necessarily they will win. Their objection will be heard, but they are being listened to, and so I think that's great.
Well, let's talk a little bit about what some prosecutors in real life have been complaining about in the last few years. Not so much recently, but I would say maybe about 4 or 5 years ago, I heard this several times from prosecutors saying, you know, those CSI television programs are making it very difficult for me to win my cases, because if I go in with a case that doesn't have a lot of DNA evidence or a lot of forensic evidence for the jury to consider, they don't think it's a very complete case. What are your reactions to that?
That was a topic of a lot of discussion for a while. They had a term for it. It was called the CSI Effect. And there may or may not have been a real effect. I think it is probably true, and again, this is just my opinion, that people are, general public is more aware of the techniques and the type of things that a crime laboratory will do or can do, and might expect to see more of that. Maybe what the general public doesn't understand is that the forensic science that comes to bear on any particular case is not necessarily used in every case. Certainly we see it in murder cases and high-profile cases, or anywhere where there's maybe a crime scene reconstruction to take place. But on a daily basis, if we're talking about the overall crime, the burglaries and things like that, we have the fingerprints that's routinely done, but probably not as much is used on every single case that the general public thinks would be used or should be used.
We just have a minute or so before the break, so in about 30 seconds or less, if you could tell me, what is the reality of the criminalist that maybe the public doesn't understand?
I think the reality of that maybe the public doesn't understand is that we are pretty much neutral observers. We apply our science to the matters of the law. I would say as a general rule, we are all employed by a law enforcement agency of one degree or another, but that's only circumstance. There's very few and far in between private crime laboratories. And when there are private crime laboratories, they are generally staffed by people that have already had a career in the law enforcement arena and then have moved on to private work. So sometimes that's used against us as a possible bias, but the fact remains it's the only place to work is in a public service area.
Okay, well, we're going to have to take a break at the moment, but when we come back, we'll continue this conversation. And when we do come back, we'll talk about the use of statistical analysis and probability theory in the Criminalist and the Crime Lab. Stay with us.
Should your company buy or sell, expand or not, relocate, or simply stay the same? If you'd like to examine past and present predictions, integrating finances and people, and make future predictions based on all that information, a career in economics is for you. You can become a part of this exciting field with a degree from Cal State Long Beach.
Welcome back to Talking Points. I'm Dave Kelly. My guest today is Ruben Flores. He's a retired criminalist, and we're talking about forensic science and how it compares with the CSI programs we see on television. And speaking of television, Ruben, I want to mention the O.J. Simpson trial because that is the trial that most of us became much more aware of what a criminalist does and what goes on in crime scene investigation and evidence collection and so forth. And we don't want to rehash the case because that's been done hundreds of times, but just in sort of a general sense, how did that trial change public perception of what the criminalist does and what the crime lab does, and how did it change some of the practices that were done in the crime lab?
The O.J. trial, I believe, was actually, in my opinion, pretty much a benchmark. And there were things that changed during and after the O.J. trial. You mentioned the word awareness, and that is the biggest thing that the general public saw. They became aware of criminalistics, of forensic science, and how it's used and what it does. Not only did that make the field popular, but a lot of people had never heard of forensic science. A lot of young people that were looking for careers or career changes at that point started flooding the market, the educational market and the job market for these types of jobs. In terms of internally and within the forensic science, again, just my opinion, that it raised some awareness of people like myself working in the field that there were some things that needed to be tightened up. Maybe not for rigorous reasons, but at the very least for public perception. Because as we mentioned in the first segment, communication of what we do to a lay jury is critically important. Well, the jury now saw, more vividly things that we do, and has and should have certain expectations. So we did, I believe the profession did some self-reflection and sought ways to improve at least the perceptions, and then physically or in reality tighten up some of the procedures that may have been not as tight as they needed to be.
I guess the defense attorneys in that case attacked every piece of evidence that was presented, and primarily they seemed to attack the method of collection, the chain of custody, and then the analysis in the crime lab. Right. And from your perspective, having actually worked in the field for 33 years, what are your thoughts about that process today? Is it pretty solid? If it's presented in court as a prospective juror, can we assume that there is integrity in that process every step of the way?
I would say in the overwhelming number of, I was going to say generally, but in the overwhelming number of cases, it is. It's solid. That being said, there will always be these challenges, and we should know that defense attorneys' duty is to attack what we do and find if there's anything deficient. That lawyer has a duty to find that out, duty to his client.
And as far as working with detectives and working with the prosecutor, which is the district attorney, the attorneys, again, in that case, the defense attorneys, tried to present the idea that there was collusion between the crime lab and all of the officers and so on, so that they were all working together as a team to make the evidence seem more than it was, or to even plant evidence and things of that nature. You've been on the witness stand. Yes. As a criminalist. You've been examined and cross-examined and so on. But you can tell us, I'm sure, based on our previous conversations, there is no collusion. You're a scientist first, and to you, the most important thing is the integrity of the science.
Everybody that I have worked with in the forensic science fields, I think feels that they are a scientist first. That's not to say, and I'm not aware of any, but that's not to say that there may have been cases where a scientist or criminalist or forensic scientist will be biased in one way or another. But I haven't generally found that to be the case. All of the people that I have ever worked for have their allegiance primarily to the science. We don't always give the prosecutors or the investigators the answers they want. As a matter of fact, more often than the general public might realize, we don't give them the answers that they're looking for. We just give them, we do our examination, we reach conclusions, and that's what we report. Do
the detectives ever pressure the scientists, the criminalists, to come up with a particular result?
Over the years, I would say yes. However, I don't know if I would want to call that pressure or just enthusiasm for their case. But I think even within the law enforcement realm, detectives, investigators are even more keenly aware now that we have our job to do as forensic scientists, and especially I have found the most experienced investigators just turn things over to us and accept our results without trying to apply that undue pressure.
Now, in your experiences of being on the witness stand during some high-profile cases, I guess you've had some encounters with defense attorneys, but you've also had some encounters with prosecutors that didn't feel like they were getting as much out of you as they wanted. Tell us about that.
Yes, well, occasionally on either side, I think it's natural. The legal system we have is an adversary system, so each side wants to win their case, and occasionally either it could be a prosecutor or it could be a defense attorney will, in my view, maybe sometimes be a little overzealous. And I've been very careful as a criminalist in my career to not just bend and say yes to something that somebody wants a yes answer to. And I've also been very careful to make sure that whatever I say, report, opinion, conclusion, is accurately translated, if that happens, to whoever's making the jury, whoever's making the decision in the case. I don't let either side try to twist my words, and they would do that in questioning, and if I needed to, I'd make a correction to a statement made by either attorney if I thought it was incorrect conclusion of my statement or my opinion.
So again, for the members of the audience that may wind up on a jury one day, what advice would you give to them when they're listening to the criminalist testify? How should they be listening, and what should they be listening for?
Actually, I don't think I'd venture to do that.
Okay.
I would just say, pay attention. In the legal sense, everything that's presented is weighted a certain amount, and that's the legal process. I think the jury should pay attention to the instructions from the court as to how they need to weigh any evidence presented, including that from a forensic scientist.
Spoken like a true objective scientist.
Thank you.
Okay. Let's talk about statistical analysis.
Okay.
Today, everything seems to be based on statistical analysis and probability, and certainly we see that in the crime lab. Tell us a little bit about that, particularly when it comes to situations like firearms identification.
Sure. Statistics is something that, it'd be ideal. It's ideal if you can hang your hat on some statistics and say that your conclusion, whatever that might be, is correct to this probability or that probability. I think everybody would like to see that. And in a lot of areas of forensic science, as with any science, that is possible. There's a lot of statistics to back things up. There are some areas, though, particularly in what we call the comparative examinations, such as firearms identification, fingerprints, shoe print pattern matching, things like that, where it's not really possible to generate those type numbers. We get pressured sometimes in the court by either side, give us what percentage of the time do you think this is correct? And we're not necessarily able to answer that. And it's just the nature of the beast. For example, in firearms identification, one might say that, well, this bullet was fired from this particular firearm, and that's your conclusion. And somebody might want to know, well, how certain are you of that? Well, the fact remains that there is no way, it's impossible for us to look at every firearm that's ever been manufactured so we can make that conclusion, every firearm that now exists or may be produced in the future. It's just scientifically impossible. And those, in years past, forensic practitioners without scientific background have made statements literally that could not scientifically be backed up, such as, this bullet was fired from this firearm to the exclusion of all other bullets ever made. In times past, people actually said that. There may be some that still adhere to that now, but it's generally not the norm. So it's not always possible to provide the statistics that we would, I would say as a general public, would make things easy to base a decision on.
And the truth is, statistics and probability are used to narrow down the possibilities of a particular piece of evidence as it connects to a suspect.
Right.
And as we were talking about down the hall, there is no such thing as a 100% match. There are probabilities that make it very, very, very likely that this evidence is connected to a certain suspect. Talk about that, if you would, for a moment.
Well, that was my training from day one as a student of chemistry. And we've all learned about the bell curve, and we've all heard about the tail ends of the bell curve and the probabilities. And I think it's pretty common phrase that anything's possible in science. While I was in college, professors gave us numerous examples of where there's a very low likelihood that this event will occur, but we can't say it's impossible for it to occur. So I think that's just the general nature of the beast when it comes to science.
You mentioned that there's another area of statistics that's called, I think, Bayesian statistics.
Yes, when you and I were talking in the hallway, you mentioned some other factors that might be involved in reaching a conclusion or opinion. And what you actually hit on was an area called Bayesian statistics, where the idea basically is conducting certain tests and performing certain calculations as to statistical calculations, we can bring other factors in. For example, if some event involves a blue Toyota 4Runner, you can do some calculations, testing, run some statistics. But when you get into Bayesian statistics, you might ask questions such as, well, how many blue Toyota 4Runners are there within the 100-mile radius at that time of day on this particular day? Factors like that come into play. Bayesian statistics hasn't taken it's being looked at and possibly even being used in some forensic areas, but generally speaking, not a blanket use of it right now.
Okay, and I want to talk about another aspect of your career. There was a time when you were actually, in addition to being a criminalist, you were also a patrol officer, and it's technically called, I guess, Patrol Officer Reserve Level 1 for the LAPD. First of all, what does that mean, and why did you decide to become a reserve patrol officer?
Well, a reserve officer, I believe it's nationwide, but certainly in Southern California, and is essentially a volunteer police officer. They go through the same training, they meet the same entry standards, they're expected to perform to the same level of degree and professionalism as any police officer. And then upon graduation from a reserve police academy, they are assigned to I was assigned, for example, to a patrol unit within the Los Angeles Police Department. So it was just something I wanted to do. When I started in the crime laboratory, that was my first actually exposure to anything inside of law enforcement, and I was in that environment. I was around police officers, detectives. I saw police cars all the time, and I found it fascinating and decided that it might be something that I wanted to do. And ultimately, I ended up signing up for and becoming a reserve officer. Did that for 16 years, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I actually considered it community service. A lot of people talk about crime, complain about crime, and not many people have the opportunity to do something about it. And at the end of my tenure as a reserve officer, I feel that even if it was that small, I made some sort of difference, and at least I could tell myself I did something about it. I did my part.
We're out of time, but just real quickly, how would you assess your 33-year career as a criminalist? Are you happy with how things turned out?
It was a wonderful career. I loved it. I wouldn't do anything different. It met all my expectations for variety and satisfaction.
Well, thank you for being with us today. And thank you for joining us on this edition of Talking Points. Join us soon for another episode. Until then, I'm Dave Kelly. Have a nice day.